May. Because I've just been talking to a few people who said this kind of conference is becoming increasingly important because of the kind of culture that we live in, not just politically, but also, as we found out this week, in the Church of England, which is becoming increasingly, again, conservative and male-dominated. So let me say this prayer. Loving God, bless us as we gather in this moment as women to raise our voices at a time when it seems really important to do so. Amen. So welcome. A little bit more about women's voices and then I'll hand over to my colleague Jenny. We began 12 years ago, as I said, in a tiny classroom in Chester University. And there were about 12 people there, I think. Oh, it might have been 20, but it felt small. And then we carried on in Chester Diocese for quite some time. And 2 years ago we moved to here. And this year, Women's Voices has actually 3 locations, so that's why the slide now has to say Women's Voices Manchester, because we also have Women's Voices London and Women's Voices Bury St Edmunds. Yeah, Sarah was responsible for London.
It's on again in May next year.
And next year, we're adding Liverpool to that mix. So this year, we've gone from having about 12 people in that tiny classroom in Chester University to just under 200 people attending a Women's Voices conference, which is pretty good. So Jenny, our first speaker is Jenni Beaumont, who I've known for quite a while now. As Vicar of St Michael's, Alcrington, which must be a Lancashire name, it must be. And Jenni's Bishop's advisor on women's ministry and in the Diocese of Manchester, and also Vice Chair of the National Association of Diocesan Advisors to Women in Ministry. Jenni's currently working towards a doctorate, and she's going to talk to us on the theme of Vocation to Disagree, Flourishing Beyond Agreement. So while she says a few words, I'll switch over the slides. Welcome, Jenni, with me.
Absolutely terrifying. Gary O'Neill said to me before, just remember how many friends you've got in the dream, and that's actually more terrifying. Not really scary, but yeah, you're very speaking to a lot of intelligent women is intimidating. But I am delighted to be here, not just to share my work, but to be here with so many women who have shaped my vocation to disagree. Hannah, who is my supervisor, you'll hear from later. Liz, who is responsible for me being ordained, I would say. Kate Bruce, who you'll hear from later, led my ordination retreats. And so many colleagues and friends I've met along the way. They each taught me something about how to inhabit the church, the academy, and the pulpit. So my research is on the 5 guiding principles and how they are experienced by Catholic-formed men and women in the Church of England. I want to know whether flourishing is truly possible or whether it's just containment. When I began this research, I told myself it might help pave the way for the first woman Archbishop of Canterbury. And now here we are, with Dame Sarah Lally, named as the 106th Archbishop of Canterbury. So my work is actually dynamite. The focus of my research, as I've said, is the 5 guiding principles and how they're experienced. But today I'm going to explore how these principles don't resolve disagreement, they institutionalise it. They affirm our priesthood but permit its refusal. And to frame this, I'm going to turn to my very favourite woman in history, who is Mary Ward, a recusant Catholic, visionary founder and woman of fierce fidelity, who was imprisoned by the Pope, the Vatican, for thinking too much like the Jesuits. She wrote, "I do not and cannot repent this way, for it came from God." Her life teaches that holy disagreement is not rebellion, it's vocation. Like Mary Ward, many Catholic-formed women priests today live in contradiction, validly called yet structurally refused, strategically managed by a call for a consensus instead of a call for communion. The 2014 ordination of women to the episcopate was accompanied by the 5 guiding principles designed to hold theological disagreement in communion. They affirm that all ordained ministries are open to women and men, acknowledge that many cannot accept this, and promise pastoral provision and mutual flourishing. Yet in practice the principles institutionalise strategic ambiguity. They name our priesthood but suspend its reception. They invite us to flourish within a structure that refuses to receive us. For Catholic-formed women clergy, this feels less like flourishing and more like containment, a polite refusal dressed in theological generosity. So 11 years since the publication of the 5 Guiding Principles, the Church of England has named its first woman Archbishop of Canterbury. Some will herald this as a victory of the 5 Guiding Principles. Some have already decried that it's the end times of the Church. But I think it's just a signal that there's more work to be done. This article appeared in the Conversation on the 6th of October. I think I said 7th in my presentation the other day, the 6th of October. It's written by Sharon Jagger, who is a researcher in theology at York St John University, and she's done a lot of work on the 5 Guiding Principles. This article discusses how the new Archbishop of Canterbury cannot preside in hundreds of churches. Her priesthood is validly conferred, yet structurally denied. What the Church has achieved is suspended reception, where priesthood is affirmed in theory but denied in practice. This suspended reception is not neutral, it is a polite refusal dressed in theological generosity and an affirmation that masks denial. Catholic-formed women priests inhabit this tension daily. We are configured to Christ but contained by policy, and we are called to flourish beyond agreement in a space that will not yet receive us. In this article, Sharon Jagger notes that the new Archbishop cannot preside, not because she lacks sacramental formation, but because the 5 Guiding Principles frame women as a problem to be managed. And I'm calling this ontological erasure. To preside at the Eucharist is not to perform a role, it is to enact a sacramental reality. To be ordained is not to be authorised, it is to be configured to Christ, to the Church, to the people we serve. Yet Catholic women like me are asked to flourish in a system that structurally denies the very thing we are. We exist in ontological suspension, sacramentally configured and structurally refused. Mary Ward knew this landscape, imprisoned, suppressed, yet she answered her call, and she was unwavering in answering God's call on her life. She believed women were called not to silence, but to mission. She wrote, "There is no such difference between men and women, that women may not do great things." That conviction echoes through the lives of Catholic-formed women priests today, and we are called to flourish anyway. Even satire has named the discomfort. Women bishops are as scary as air fryers. The humour, though, masks the anxiety. Women's sacramental agency unsettles structures built to exclude it. Behind the humour lies a deeper truth. The Church's response to women's priesthood is often a polite refusal, dressed in theological generosity. The 5 Guiding Principles were designed to hold theological diversity, but they also hold fear fear of women's priesthood, of sacramental authority in female hands. Archbishop Sarah Mullally, designate, offered a different vision in her acceptance address. She said, "I intend to be a shepherd who enables everyone's ministry and vocation to flourish, whatever our tradition." Her words echo Rowan Williams' theology of trust. "The Church's good news," he wrote, "is that human community is possible." And they resonate with Mary Ward's conviction. She wrote, the ordinary way to perfection is to do what we are called to do and bear the contradiction that follows. But this vision of diversity nourishing unity is not realised in a system that structurally refuses the sacramental ministry of the very person appointed to lead it. The tension remains: a woman Archbishop of Canterbury whose priesthood is valid but not received, a church that preaches mutual flourishing but enshrines asymmetry, a community called to trust yet built on sacramental refusal. To flourish beyond agreement is not to win a debate, it is to embody grace where reception is withheld, to hold difference without fear, and to live the vocation to disagree. The 5 guiding principles encode a symbolic economy: sacramental roles distributed by sex, not vocation. Masculinity is treated as essential to representing Christ. Femininity permitted only where it aligns with passivity or containment. This gendered logic underpins sacramental denial. Women may represent the Church but never Christ. Their priesthood is affirmed in policy yet refused in practice. This is not theological diversity, it is ecclesial control. It is not open disagreement, it is polite refusal dressed in theological generosity, designed to soothe rather than resolve. The Roman Catholic theologian Tina Beattie calls it a violation of baptismal dignity. It is a refusal to trust grace where it disturbs hierarchy. And Mary Ward would call it spiritual cowardice. To disagree faithfully in this space is a vocation. To persist in priestly identity when reception is withheld, to enact communion amid containment. Forward in Faith insists that priesthood is ontological, not functional, that the priest must be male to act in persona Christi. This conviction has coherence, but also consequence. It denies that women can sacramentally signify Christ. Now, my critique of this is not a rejection of sacramental seriousness. It is a Catholic interrogation of its internal inconsistency. If ordination configures someone to Christ by Christ and not biology, then gender cannot limit divine vocation. Mary Ward dismantled this binary 4 centuries ago when she wrote, "There is no such difference between men and women, that women may not do great things." Her theology was incarnational, focused on the divine image restored in every baptized body. To refuse women's priesthood is not fidelity to tradition, it is resistance to the incarnation's inclusivity. And this is what I call ontology washing, a rhetorical affirmation that conceals structural denial. The Church says we are priests, but builds oversight structures that treat us as if we are not. That is not mutual flourishing, it is sacramental incoherence. It leaves us in ecclesial liminality, valid but not received, visible but not recognised. These are not neutral arrangements, they are polite refusals, dressed in theological generosity, mechanisms that maintain exclusion while claiming communion. They are mechanisms of exclusion that Shannon Jagger calls symbolic violence, with women priests asked to act as deacons, excluded from liturgical roles, and treated as second-tier clergy. This is a theological wound, and it contradicts the sacramental ecclesiology of Vatican II and other magisterial documents the Roman Catholic Church has produced, which orients that church toward communion, encounter, and grace. Now, Forward in Faith often say that the Church of England, as one part of the One Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, cannot unilaterally make the decision to ordain women, because they'll be out of step with Rome. I contend that to indefinitely suspend reception because Rome has not yet moved believed is to mistake ecclesial patience for ecclesial paralysis. The Church of England, in affirming the validity of women's orders, has already made a theological claim. To then deny their reception is not unity, it is containment, and it risks reducing the Church to a federation of vetoes rather than a communion of grace. Mary Ward's followers knew this space well, living religious lives in disguise, faithful to a church that refused to see them. Their hidden vocation mirrors women priests today, who celebrate Eucharist in communities that still call them impossible. To flourish beyond agreement is to embrace that liminal calling as the very place where grace grows. Some call this mutual flourishing, but what we often see is symbolic choreography, a program of inclusion masking structural asymmetry. So the person on the left is the Bishop of London, Sarah Mullally, Archbishop Designate. You might not recognise the person on the right because he's not wearing his dressing gown. That is the Bishop of Fulham. Catholic women priests live this contradiction acutely, ordained into a church that names our priesthood as valid, yet subject to oversight by bishops who deny the real presence, reject sacramental ontology, or refuse to receive us. This is not theological diversity, it is ontological containment. A redemptive Catholic rereading of the five guiding principles does not await authorization, it proceeds from the ontology of grace itself. To indefinitely defer reception is not ecclesial prudence, it is a failure of theological nerve, a paralysis born of fear, not faith. And I end where my own formation began, with Mary Ward, in whose vision I was educated by the Loretto sisters. Mary Ward did not ask permission, she named the truth. Fervour and faith do not have to fade simply because we are women. In writing this passage here to an unnamed male priest, she did not condemn him, she just dismantled the logic. She did not wait for reception, she enacted vocation. Where the Church offers polite refusal dressed in theological generosity, Mary Ward offered theological fire dressed in fidelity. This is not historical colour, it is theological fire, and it burns through every structure that affirms women's priesthood but refuses their reception. We are asked to accept polite refusal dressed in theological generosity, but grace is not polite, it is disruptive, incarnational, and uncontainable. Word's verity here is not a relic, it is a reckoning. Liz gave us some instructions before today that said we have to finish on time for lunch, and I'm taking that very seriously. Any questions?
It's not so much a question, it's just a statement that I think what you just said is a tour de force, brilliantly expressed, absolutely on the money, eloquent and sharp. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Archbishop to be weighed down by the fact she's a woman. I want the female archbishop to be a good Archbishop of Canterbury. That's what I want. And I don't know Bishop Sarah at all, but I have heard of her. I'm aware of her work. And I do believe she's been appointed because she was the best candidate for the job, actually.
She was.
Not because she was a woman, and this is where we are.
Where can we read more of your work? Because I'm on a programme. Stuff I'm writing at the moment.
I've not published anything, so no way.
Yes. Well, when you finish your PhD, so we can read that.
I need a deadline. deadline is what I need, as Hannah's discovered this week. I used to be a journalist before I was ordained, and I need a deadline, otherwise I don't do it.
Jenny, I would agree. You must write this because we need it. But I suppose what's going through my gut at the moment is we're 30 years after women were ordained. What on earth are we playing at? And this isn't a question to you. Sorry, there isn't an answer to what I'm saying. It's rhetorical. But what on earth have we done to and within the Church of England by conforming to a situation that is immoral, unjust, and untenable? I really, that isn't a question. It's just what can we reflect on what we have done by agreeing to this? And I say, as an ordained woman within the Church of England, but with a vast amount of anger.
And I think it's difficult because when women were first ordained, women were ordained into the church under the spirit of reception, that meant that the church could at any point say, we've made a mistake, women can no longer be ordained, and then they would refuse to ordain any more women. The clear decision that was made when General Synod voted to allow women to become bishops meant that spirit of reception had ended, and then that's what introduced the 5 guiding principles. In my research, and I haven't done any, this is surface level analysis because I haven't dug down very deeply yet, so I'm still in the middle of the fieldwork, but in my research, those women who were ordained in that spirit of reception felt that they were ordained into a church that wanted to listen to their ministry and into a church that wanted to be shaped by women. Women who've been ordained since the introduction of the 5 guiding principles and who have had to assent to the 5 guiding principles, see the 5 guiding principles as something that contains them and silences them. And it's about that structural asymmetry and the way the church has managed women as a problem rather than something to be received. Kate?
I think a general question for everybody, and it's not an academic question, but do people share my sense that things are actually getting worse?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, one of my roles, I'm Vice Chair of NADOM, and at our conference earlier this year, Christina Rees came to talk to us, and she just listened to all the women in the room, and just to see how things are going. And she said as well, the general feel in the room was just backsliding.
Horrible.
There's a lot, things have regressed in the church. So yeah, it's a bit miserable really.
I think that goes beyond the church though.
Yes.
I've had conversations with our LGBT and they feel the same. They feel very intimidated and threatened at the moment. So I think it's the present cultural leadership.
At the risk of me being recorded, I think, if I may, to those people who are from Manchester in the room, I think we've seen a misuse of the 5 guiding principles in Manchester this year, the stretching of it in the way the deacon ordinations took place, and what happened at the deacon ordinations. I think that stretched the integrity of what the 5 guiding principles. So, at the ordination of deacons this year, there was one ordinand who didn't want to be ordained by the diocesan bishop because he had indicated that he was in favour of the prayers of living and loving faith. He would support their introduction in the diocese. If they were approved at Bishop's Council, he would support their introduction in the diocese. There was one ordinand who objected to that. So, exercised his conscience to be refused to be ordained by the diocesan bishop and picked his bishop, basically. So, my personal belief is it was a theological, ecclesial and liturgical nonsense, but at the point of ordination, the suffragan stepped forward, ordained that one ordinand, and then the diocesan did the rest of the ordinations. I was having a conversation with Hannah this week about something I'm thinking about that. Everybody can exercise their conscience in the church, apart from women. Women are unconscionable. We just, there is no other way of putting it, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm seeing an ordinand who's joined the society because he's got a conscience issue with LGBTQ acceptance of the ministry of women
Yeah.
because of his conscious thing that he doesn't want to be ordained by CC.
And in Manchester, that afternoon, the same afternoon as the ordination of deacons, we had another ordination of deacons with a Conservative bishop, with a flying bishop. But it was the wrong flavour of flying bishop. So he was Catholic Conservative and not Conservative Evangelical. So at what point do we say enough is enough? How do not yet? Sorry, Lisa.
Bearing in mind that things are getting worse, and if you like, the pushback against women's ordination is growing again, and this sort of a gathering is under threat. How are we going to go forward? Have you got suggestions to us as individuals, isolated individuals, as to how we can actually maintain our own enthusiasms and the networks?
I don't actually. I was asked a similar question on Thursday, and the only thing I have, because sometimes I get quite down. I wrote much of this at Gladstone's library. When I opened my notebook to start writing, I'd written myself a little note about a year ago that said, "This will be a hopeful piece." And I was so grateful for that little note, because there were so many times when I'm doing this and I'm reading about it, I get so angry and wound up. And the only thing I can say is Mary Ward often said she knew she'd been called by God, and people questioned her all the time, and she was absolutely firm in her knowledge of her own calling, because she said God cannot be against himself, and God has called me. And that's basically where I am, I think. I have no general words of encouragement, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much for that presentation, which really resonated with me. And thank you very much for leading us in appreciation of Dame Sarah's election. I think she's going to be a brilliant leader for the Church of England. May I just ask, however, as I'm sure is true of many others here, I have worked elsewhere in the Anglican Communion, and at the moment I'm suffering deep sadness, as well as joy that we have our woman Archbishop. I'm suffering deep sadness at the fact that so many of our sister churches are saying, "Up with this, we cannot put." And so many parts of the world which only very recently, or not at all, have women priests, are going away further into conservatism because of this. I don't know how to square the circle, but I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or comments.
I have to say I don't. I mean, part of me, because I am a really bad Anglican. I have to confess, I'm not very good at being in the Church of England. I struggle with it every single day. And so some of the challenges, I think, that you're talking about are our colonial heritage. And you know, there's a lot else that goes on with that. I mean, the reason we have an Anglican communion is because we sent missionaries out. So there's I don't have an answer. Is all I can say. I'm not sure. Many archbishops have also failed, and so I can't pretend to be no more than that.